Side 7, Objective Bajor, by John Peel. Continuing on page 243. He locked onto the other craft, no matter how it twisted and turned. Despite its shield, the alien vessel couldn't sustain such damaging fire. A moment later, it was a silent fireball, and the Cardassian ship slipped past it and on to another assault. All craft in attack formation, Tarvok reported. There was excitement in his voice. Preparing to engage. Now! Gavron's pilot moved the flagship into the correct alignment and then boosted for the Hive. The gunnery officer sat hunched over his controls, eager for the right second to launch his cargo of photon torpedoes. On the tactical screen, Gavron could see his other ships starting their bombing run. He smiled, anticipating the devastation to come. Laser fire erupted about them as they drew closer to the Hive. Automatic fire, Ladra reported from her science station. Computer-controlled, most likely. Shields holding. Is it enough to damage any of our ships? Asked Gavron. Yes, confirmed Ladra, but it would take several direct hits. The faster we make this run, the better. Understood. Gavron ignored the threat. Computer-controlled fire was notoriously unreliable in combat situations. He could afford a few losses. One went down even as he thought this. There was a brief explosion on the screen, and then further raking fire from the waiting Hive. Steady, he growled, but the pilot didn't really need encouragement. He seemed more eager for the attack than worried about being hit. Morale was high, that was certain. The forerunners of the attack formation were now drawing close to the Hive. Laser fire burned through space at the ships, missing more often than it scored. But another Cardassian ship erupted into a flower of flame, and then a third. First torpedoes away, Ladra announced. Gavron saw the sparks of fire from his lead ships, which almost instantly began to peel away from the Hive to avoid being caught in the backlash. He grinned as he waited to see the impact. Fire exploded in several places at once, scattering debris and smoke into the stars, to vanish almost instantly. 16 hits, Ladra reported. Minor damage to 2 of the airlocks. Their shields are still holding for the most part. Was that all? Gavron hunched down further, scowling at the image on the screen as his flagship came ready for its own run. Take us low, he ordered the pilot. And then, to the gunnery officer, fire all possible torpedoes as we pass. The screen was now filled with the smooth metallic surface of the Hive as they whipped across its surface. Tactical showed their target as drawing closer and closer. He gripped the arms of his seat, eager for the kill. Torpedoes away, the gunnery officer reported. Take us out of here, Gavron snapped. Screen to reverse view. As they pulled away from the Hive, the view switched to show the airlock they had aimed at. Further laser strikes splattered harmlessly off their shields. Gavron ignored them, concentrating on the target zone. Vast explosions ripped through the area, twisting the smooth skin of the Hive into jagged teeth, biting at empty space. Gases, smoke, and flames vented into the vacuum. Bring us around for another sweep. All vessels, commence second run, ordered Gavron. Pacat felt the second Hive shudder. He looked at his screens. There hadn't been time to appoint a new security master, so he was commanding the defense squadrons. They had deployed their monofilament nets as ordered, and had now taken out almost half of the attacking force. But some of the enemy were getting through, and the Hive was suffering damage. Warning lights flickered around airlock 7. A picture on the screen showed that it had been hit, and was venting gas and materials into space. The damage control teams sealed the section, but there was now a gap in the skin of the Hive. The enemy was bound to make use of this weakness. These Cardassians were definitely stronger than either he or Dron had anticipated, and they attacked with a ferociousness he had never imagined. Still, there were ways to turn that aggression against them. They were bound to target the damaged area, so Pacat smiled to himself. They would not get the swift victory they were obviously anticipating. He tapped the comp before him. Master Premon's face filled the screen. "It is time," he said. "Prepare." "Understood." The screen went blank. Pacat studied the images in the holographic display above the table. It showed the alien vessels regrouping for a second assault. Their diversionary craft had been almost completely destroyed, and there were still 16 of his forces left. These immediately began to single out targets among the remaining Cardassian vessels and moved to intercept. The alien commander would most likely have some of his forces break off to engage the Hive ships, but the rest were bound to repeat their bombing run, with Airlock 7 being the main target. He smiled. The Hive would be ready for them. "Prepare the Defiant for immediate launch," Sisko ordered as he reached ops with Torq. He glanced around. "Chief," he snapped, spotting O'Brien. "How is she?" "Everything's back to optimum," O'Brien reported with a grin. "We may need everything she's got," Sisko informed him. "We launch as soon as Kira and Dax arrive." As O'Brien hurried off to the Defiant, Sisko turned to Lieutenant Soika. "How long until they arrive?" "Less than 5 minutes, Captain," Soika reported. "They've just requested docking assignment." "Good. Tell them to head for the Defiant as soon as they arrive. We'll launch as soon as they reach it, so get the clearances ready now." "You've got it, Captain," Soika replied. "And good luck." "Thanks." Sisko turned to Torq. "Right, let's go. Even if we do have a plan by the time we reach the Hive, we won't have long to implement it." "I understand." Torq scuttled to keep up with him as they reached the turbolift. "I do have 1 or 2 thoughts as to how to proceed, but I feel that discussion should be put off until the others are with us." "I quite agree." Sisko stepped out of the lift and almost into Quark's face. "Captain," the Ferengi began, "I really must protest." "Not now, Quark," growled Sisko, irritated. "There are more important things to worry about than your profits." "Bite your tongue!" exclaimed Quark, horrified. "It's just that—" "Save it," Sisko snarled, pushing past him. Quark watched Sisko and the weird-looking alien leave. It looked as if Sisko had a plan. Hurrying back into his bar, he grinned at the few dozen patrons there. "I'm giving 10 to 1 odds on Sisko being able to stop the Hive," he announced. "Any takers?" There were, indeed. "We can expect trouble now," Dimas announced as he stepped back from the control panel. "Raldar is bound to know that I have overridden his orders. It is only a matter of time until they respond." "I imagine so," agreed Bree. "But what form will it take, do you think?" Dimas's snout wrinkled. "Knowing Dron, I would expect an assault on the rooms here. He will first of all wish to silence us." "Pointless," Bree gestured to the computer. "The information is already being spread. Containment is no longer a viable option." Dimas managed a smile. "You think logically. Dron is apt to be more emotional about this." "I suppose he is," she shrugged. "So, you're the security expert. What is our best option?" Dimas had obviously considered this. "If we wait here, they'll attack. On the other hand, I do not believe that most of your fellow astronomers would be capable of defense. I suggest that we leave here those who might be better off if they surrendered." Bree nodded. "And the rest of us?" He grinned again. "I think that attack is the best form of defense, don't you? While Raldar comes looking for us, we might be better off if we incapacitated them." "What, all dozen of us?" "The odds are irrelevant," Dimas replied. "We just have to know where to strike. At the moment, our best option is to take out the guidance controls. If we stall Dron's forces, by the time that they engage us, the information we've set loose will be disseminated to all levels of the Hive. And if we are the only ones who rebel against the Hive Masters, I shall be greatly surprised." Bree gave him a delighted smile. "Dimas, you obviously learned a great deal as a youth." "I had good tutors," he replied. "Now, shall we make our selection as to who will accompany us?" The Cardassian fleet swooped toward the Hive again. Gavron detailed another 15 of his cruisers to intercept the enemy's remaining defenders. Then he ignored the side fight, concentrating his attention on their looming target. He had 39 ships remaining, including his flagship, and they were all still in full fighting mode. "Target the 2 damaged areas," he ordered Landra. "Concentrate main fire on the ruptured skin we struck last time. We will widen that gap and break the alien craft in 2. They'll have no hope of regenerating it this time." He turned to the gunnery officer. "Prepare maximum barrage. I want every torpedo you can manage rammed into that gap." "Acknowledged," exclaimed the officer happily. He was just as eager for this kill as Gavron was. "Begin the next assault," Gavron ordered, and Tarvok relayed his command to the other ships of the battered fleet. Gavron smiled happily. The battle was hard fought, but it was being won. This next bombing run would lay open the Hive. A third run would most likely be needed to finish it off, but that would be all. It would be a glorious victory, one that would sweep him back to the fore in the military again, one that would bring him the power that he deserved. Those who had conspired against him in the past wouldn't dare to do so once he was the undisputed savior of Cardassia Prime. All about him, his troops moved with calm efficiency. Every one of them could sense their impending victory and almost taste it. They were all proud to be a part of this glorious hour. Then the run began. The remaining ships closed about him as they spun down toward the Hive and bashed into the barrage of laser fire, which immediately stopped. Gavron frowned, puzzled. What was going on? The enemy couldn't have run out of energy for their weapons yet, surely. Why the sudden shut-off, then? A nagging fear tapped at the rear of his mind. The aliens were up to something. "The Hive is changing configuration," Landra reported. "I am reading strange movements." "On screen," Gavron barked. As they drew closer to the Hive, the flattened shape of the wings was starting to alter. They were beginning to curve upward, as if the ship were trying to gather the attacking vessels to itself. What was going on? The reason for the cessation of laser fire was now obvious. The cannons would have simply hit each other and the Hive in this formation. Did this mean that the Hive had some other weapon that they had not anticipated? If so, what could it be? "I'm picking up an energy buildup," Landra reported. They had already passed between the upspread wings and were passing over the main body of the Hive now. Ahead of them, tantalizing, was the open maw of the airlock they had destroyed on their last run. Disturbed and confused, Gavron snapped, "Pull out! Get us out of here as fast as possible! Order all vessels to take evasive maneuvers!" The pilot responded instantly, whipping the nose of the flagship up and outward toward open space. Tarvok started to relay his orders to the rest of the fleet. It would be moments before they could follow Gavron's lead. Moments they did not have. The energy discharged across the space enclosed by the folded wings. It was that same awesome force that had ripped apart Terrain 4. The vast energies seethed as they burned, ripping apart the Cardassian attackers in blue fire, rending them into shards, and then absorbing the metals and components. The outer edge of the destructive wave sprawled across the wing of Gavron's vessel. The flagship groaned and shook as the wing was ripped apart and annihilated. Then they were free, spinning uncontrollably away from the Hive. Behind them, rapidly vanishing clouds of metallic gas were all that was left of the Cardassian fleet. Chapter 27. As soon as the Defiant was on course for the Durain system, Sisko convened a meeting in his ready room. Both Torq and Sana were there, along with Dax and Kira. "I think it's time we compared notes," Sisko said. "Torq, why don't you explain what you've discovered?" "It is frighteningly simple," Torq said sadly. "According to our official histories, the first Hive built the Hive and conceived the Great Design. That much is certainly true. Later, the 203rd Hive rebelled, wanting to change the purpose of the Great Design. They were defeated and the true way was restored. And that is certainly a lie, which has been deliberately promulgated down the millennia. In fact, the revolution succeeded. The rebels gained control of the Hive from the true Hive Masters. The problem was that they knew they could never win over the entire population of the Hive to their views. Instead, they made it appear that they had lost the fight, and their views had been suppressed. In truth, they changed the great design, but slowly, over the course of several generations. Their successors carried on their changes gently so that it would not be noticed. Since the great design wasn't to be implemented for hundreds of generations, they had plenty of time to do this. The real great design stipulated that the Hive would cross intergalactic space and then seek out a world in the closest star system that they could. The important matter here was that it was to be an uninhabited planet. I am not certain what was to happen then, but it was to be a peaceful termination to the voyage. The 203rd Hive changed that plan. They saw that the survival of the Hive was the highest priority, and they believed that the great design was wrong. They preferred the concept of continuing the Hive as it was and duplicating it to ensure a greater chance of survival. They felt that recreating the great journey was the best way to ensure survival of our species. They altered records and programming of the computers to make it look as if their plan were still the original great design. I am now convinced of this, and I believe that we must confront the Grandmaster and expose the truth. Once the Hive knows the facts, they will not allow him to proceed with the destruction of Bajor. "I think you're being naive, Torq," Kira informed him. "Dron is in power, and things are going his way. He's not going to simply surrender because you have truth and logic on your side." "We are not a violent people," Torq explained. "Once the truth is known, Dron will be powerless." "There is more that you do not yet know," Sana informed him. "Dax and I have been studying the data that Hosea gave you. We believe that it is the original coding for the Great Design." "Really?" Torq was astonished and then thrilled. "You have been able to translate it?" "Some of it," Dax said. "The bulk of it consists of command codes that I can't fathom. Presumably they relate to the Hive operations, but the rest..." She looked at Sana. "What you have surmised is correct," Sana agreed. "The Great Design was indeed forcibly altered. The original plan called for the location of an uninhabited planet. When the Hive reached one that was capable of sustaining life but was barren, then this program was to be triggered." "I see." Torq's snout wrinkled as he concentrated. "But what does the program do?" "I cannot be sure." Sana sighed. "Perhaps in the context of the Hive's computers I could tell you, but now I cannot. I only know that this was the original Great Design, and the one that we should try to restore." Dax called up a schematic on the screen of the Durain system. "Here's Durain 4, she said, pointing. "The two Hives that were in orbit there have begun to move. One has headed into Cardassian space and is currently being attacked by the Cardassian Third Fleet. The other started to move toward Bajor, but has for some reason paused. It is quite close in spatial terms to Durain 3. That is a decent-sized planet capable of sustaining life, but is barren. It's almost exactly what the first Hive notes specify for a target world." Torq nodded. "Then if we move the Hive closer to it, we could still implement whatever the original Great Design was." "I don't see why not," Dax replied. "Except, of course, for the small matter of the Hive Masters. I doubt Dron and his fellows will go for this." "Then we shall convince them," Torq replied. He grasped Sana's hand. "We have worked together to create a solution," he said happily. "The Great Design will be restored, and there will be no need to absorb Bajor or any other world." "I am pleased, beloved," Sana replied. Sisko coughed. "I hate to rain on your parade, but there's still the minor matter of getting to the Hive's computers to run the program." "Of course." Torq was all business again. Is it possible to communicate with the Hive from this distance? If they want to talk, Sisko informed him. I'll try and patch through a call. He shook his head. I hope that logic wins through, but I strongly doubt that Dron, or whoever's in charge now, is going to simply hand over power like that. What else can he do? Asked Torq simply. Kira snorted. Believe me, despots always have alternatives. Gavron stared at his tactical display in shock and revulsion. It told him that he had exactly 3 craft remaining beside the Cherak. Not even enough to wage a battle, much less win a war. His hopes and dreams had evaporated just as surely as his fleet had under the barrage from the Hive. Gone, he muttered, clearing the screen. The fact that all of the Hive's defenders were destroyed didn't matter much now. He glared at the terrible sight on his main screen. The Hive hung there, its destructive energy bolts invisible for the moment. But they would return if he attempted another assault on the Hive. There was no way to cross the surface of the vessel without being annihilated. There was the other side of the Hive, true. That couldn't be guarded by the devastating bolts. It still had laser cannons, though, and probably more defending ships readying themselves for launch even now. And there was no weak spot, such as the breached airlock that the Cardassians could pour their fire into. Orders, Gull? Asked Tarvok quietly. Yes, orders. He couldn't sit here brooding, sighing over the loss. This Hive was still heading for Cardassia Prime. There was still the home fleet, of course, but there was no guarantee that it would fare any better than he had. He had to assume that he was the last line of defense for Cardassia Prime. There was no honor of a glorious victory left to him now, but at least there was a chance to stave off shame and dishonor. He swung about to face Vladra. Their engine nacelles, he said slowly and carefully. Did they suffer any damage? She studied her board. One minor rupture, she announced. There is a small breach of the hull in that area. Their engines are stable? Yes. Gavron considered this news for a moment. Then we shall have to destabilize them, he decided. He turned back to Tarvok. Signal the remaining ships. We attack again. The target for us all is the weakened area of the engines. We shall pass along the top surface of the Hive to avoid their energy weapon. Expect heavy fire, and ready all remaining photon torpedoes. Acknowledged. Tarvok turned to his panel to relay the orders. Gunnery officer, Gavron demanded. How many torpedoes do we have left? 24, the officer replied. I can bring them all online for a single sweep if you desire. Do it, Gavron ordered. Target them as soon as you are able. We may be hit on the way in, and I want to be certain that we fire. Understood. Gavron studied his board. The damaged wing wouldn't really cause a problem. No vital areas had been destroyed, and propulsion was unaffected. One of the cannons was gone, but that mattered little at the moment. They could attack at least, assuming these damned aliens didn't have any further surprises in store. Course laid in, the pilot called. Ready on command. The command is given, Gavron snarled. All ships to attack. Once again, the Cherak swung about and headed for the Hive. The final 3 cruisers with them fell in alongside, their own weapons primed and ready. This would probably be the final assault. If this failed, there was nothing much left. The Hive drew closer again as they swooped toward the upper surface. As Gavron had expected, the laser cannons started firing. Shields holding, Tarvok called, as the ship shook from a direct hit. The ship was hit a second time, and he cried, down to 95%. Laser fire streaked from the surface below at the 4 ships as they made their run. The screen lit up, and they were down to 3. Gavron stared intently at the screen, willing their target to appear, willing the Cherak to greater speed. His fingers clutched the chair arm, and he could hear it creak under the pressure. Coming up on target, Ladra announced. "Range closing." "Torpedoes ready," the gunnery officer called. "Steady, steady," muttered Gavron. Another wash of laser energy crashed against their shields. "Down to 80% shields," Tarvok reported, "and falling." There was no time to worry about that. All that mattered now was the target. Gavron ignored his own fear. They would succeed. They had to. Another flare of light on the screen announced the destruction of one of his final two companions. He cursed the loss of firepower more than the loss of men. "Target locked," Ladra called, and then the gunnery officer yelled, "Torpedoes away!" Laser fire continued to rake them as they pulled away from the hive, climbing and spinning to get a better view of what was to come. "The other ship has launched its torpedoes," Ladra called, "tracking them in." As she spoke, there was another burst of flame, and their final companion was gone. But not before they had launched their attack. Gavron stared intently at the main screen, which was focused in on the engine section of the hive. There were a dozen huge nacelles, all active, as the hive moved through space. He could barely make out the target area, a small rough spot on the smooth surface of the hive. "Impact in 3, called Ladra. 2, 1. 30-some torpedoes impacted in the same small area of the hive. The screens overloaded as the blasts went off simultaneously. Ladra was still scanning and called, "Direct hit!" As the light died down and the blast dissipated into space, Gavron could make out the hive. It was still there, but there was now a gaping hole where there had only been a minor nick before. Fire and explosions raged in the 100-mile-long gap. Gouts of gas and materials spewed into space. "Readings," he called. "The enemy is crippled," Ladra reported. "2 of the nacelles are completely destroyed. 3 more are malfunctioning. Their main drive appears to be in serious trouble. I judge that they are attempting to shut it down." "No," Gavron snarled. "That cannot be allowed. If we can get their engine destabilized, it will wreck the hive and save Cardassia. We must make another attack." "Go," the gunnery officer said quietly. "We have no torpedoes left. Phaser fire alone will be insufficient." "I know." Gavron clambered to his feet. "We have only one weapon left." He didn't need to spell it out to them. Ladra and Tarvok merely nodded their understanding. "Bring us about," he ordered the pilot. "Lock onto the engine area and take us in at maximum speed." He turned to Ladra. "Prepare to flood the antimatter core." "Acknowledged." Gavron was pleased. There was no whining, no questioning. He had good troops. They would obey his commands right to the last second of their existence. Which wouldn't be very long now. "Report!" yelled Pacat at the screen. Premon's shocked face stared back at him. "What damage has been done?" Premon shook his head. "It is horrible," he replied. "People are dying down here. 2 of the engines are gone. 3 are going. We have to shut down the drive to prevent detonation. We are in dire trouble." How could this have happened? Those damned Cardassians. "Agreed," Pacat said roughly. He tapped in further commands. "Pacat to launch bays. Is the next flight not yet ready for launch?" "Momentarily," the leader answered. "We are almost prepared." "Then hurry!" Pacat yelled. This was getting far too dangerous now. He had never imagined that these Cardassians would be so relentless or so resourceful. He stared around his command center, furious and terrified. They had to stave off further trouble, though there was only one Cardassian ship left. Several screens showed the devastated area. Huge gouges had been sliced from the hive and vented into space. The number of dead and wounded was beyond calculation at the moment. The affected sections had been sealed off, but there was panic throughout the hive. And now they would have to stop their flight to repair their engines. The great design was severely compromised. Worse, the hive was in serious danger. If they had to wait too long, then it would give the enemy time to prepare further forces. "The final warship is returning," one of his technicians called. The cat stared at the display. He couldn't look directly out into space, of course, so he was forced to rely on the computer simulation. "Shoot them down!" he screamed. "Stop them!" The laser cannons began their fire again. Gavron stared in satisfaction at the Hive as they headed toward it. With their engines shut down, there was less danger of getting caught in its exhausts. They were coming at the Hive low, aiming to hug the vessel until they reached the gap they had created. And then Tarvok smiled at him. "It is a good day to die," he said, quoting the Klingon proverb. "It is as long as we take them with us," Gavron answered. He smiled back. "You're a good officer, Tarvok." "Does that mean I get a battlefield promotion?" he asked, grinning. "Ask me when this is over." Gavron watched the Hive draw closer. "Ladra?" "Ready on your command," she said simply. "Mark," he told her. 15. 14. It was a good day to die. The Charak hugged the shell of the Hive closely. Laser fire splashed across its shield, but the Cardassians paid it no mind. The shields were failing, but there was still time. Arrow straight, it plunged toward the maw of the hole they had blown earlier. 2 seconds before impact, Ladra released the antimatter core. 1 second before impact, the antimatter and matter cores flowed together. Impact. In the raging firestorm of the matter-antimatter mutual annihilation, the Hive was seized in the grip of forces it had never been designed to withstand. The engine room was vaporized, along with the rear third of the Hive. Those killed didn't even know they had been hit. The shockwave tore into the remaining portions of the vessel. Stresses ripped the levels and decks apart. The shock tore everything that remained to pieces. 12 seconds after the Charak annihilated itself, the Hive blossomed briefly into a tremendous explosion that tore it completely apart. Chapter 28. The bridge of the Defiant was once again filled with people, all with a mixture of desperation and hope in their eyes. Sisko's glance took in the crew. Kira, preparing the weapons which would most likely be needed. Odo, hunched over his panels, scanning and rescanning their path. Dax, concentrating on piloting the ship toward the ever-closer Hive. O'Brien, fiddling as ever with his equipment. Nothing ever seemed to work quite up to the Chief's expectations. Only Dr. Bashir was missing from the regular crew. Sisko had judged the doctor's treatment of refugees back on Deep Space Nine more important. One of his medics was filling in for him on the Defiant. Standing beside his command chair were Torq and Sana. Both looked just as tense as the Defiant's crew. It couldn't be easy for them, Sisko knew, to have faced the reversal of so much that they had always believed in. But now they were totally committed to saving Bajor. It looked as if Yarka had been absolutely correct. 2 had converted. He could only pray it would be sufficient. "Anything?" he called to Odo. The shapeshifter glanced up. "Plenty," he growled. "One Hive is now stationary in the Durain system for some reason. The other is..." He broke off and grunted. It was impossible for Odo to look paler than he did, but Sisko could almost swear he managed that miracle. "The other Hive is gone." "Gone?" Sisko echoed. Everyone turned to stare at Odo, who fidgeted uncomfortably under the group's stare. "I'm reading an immense amount of radiation," he reported, "and a growing cloud of debris and plasma. If I were to take a rough guess, I'd say that the Cardassians managed to destroy the Hive that was aimed for Cardassia Prime. They also seem to have been destroyed themselves. I'm reading nothing but radiation and a spreading cloud of plasma and dust." Sisko turned to Torq and Sana, who were both stunned. "I'm sorry," he said gently. You must have had friends and relatives on that Hive.
It is only fitting, Torq said, choking. We destroyed Dron. It is only right that we suffer.
He looked distraught, however.
So many gone?
We must prevent the same fate befalling the remaining Hive, Sana said firmly. She was fighting back the pain she obviously felt. If one can fall, then both can. Agreed, Sisko concurred. He glanced over at Kira. Any luck in raising the Hive? They're receiving us, Kira responded. They're just not answering our hail for whatever reason. Sisko rubbed his chin. They may have seen what happened to their sister Hive. Tell them they'll be next if they don't listen to us. Worth a try, muttered Kira, bending to her task. A moment later, she announced, Grandmaster Dron coming through. She patched it onto the main screen. Dron's face scowled out at them. Sisko could see from the pain on it that he knew about the other Hive. Sisko, the Grandmaster growled. What do you want? It's not what I want, Sisko replied. He gestured at Torq and Sana. It's what your own people want. Call off this attack on Bajor while there's still time. Dron grimaced. Bajor must be absorbed, now more than ever. He glanced away from the screen and then back. You must have seen that the other Hive has been destroyed by a suicide attack. Only we remain to implement the Great Design. Despite any setbacks, it will proceed. This is insanity, Dron, Torq said angrily. It is not the Bajorans who are insane, it is you. Call off the plan now. It is not the true Great Design. Dron simply shrugged. So, you have discovered the truth, he asked. It does not matter. I assume that the late Hoseer betrayed the secret. Partially, Torq admitted, but there were many clues to give it away. Then he started, as the meaning of Dron's words sank in. You knew the Great Design had been changed? Of course I did, you idiot, Dron snapped. All Grandmasters since the 203rd Hive have known that. So have many of the Hive Masters. The original Great Design was changed because it was unrealistic and unworkable. The rebels saw that, due to our agoraphobia, the original Great Design was impossible. The new one is our only hope for survival. By theft and murder? Torq was appalled. How could you condone this and support it? You were chosen because you were supposed to be the best. The sanctity of the Great Design was your responsibility. The welfare of the Hive was your first concern. Dron's snout wrinkled in amusement. Do not be so naive, Torq, he sneered. Surely, if you know so much, then you should know it all. The determination is just as bogus as the Great Design. The comps merely fasten their decision on what they feel you want the most. It is no more infallible than any. I reached my position because I desired it and worked for it, not because it was fated for me. Torq was reeling under this additional betrayal. All of it, he gasped. It has all been a lie. Near enough, agreed Dron. I am too weary to debate with you on this matter now. Captain, he said, turning his attention back to Sisko. I admit that I am surprised that you actually returned Torq and Sana instead of holding them hostage, but I thank you. You may deposit them and then leave. You are no longer welcome here. Sisko grinned. I always keep my word, Dron, he replied. I told you they'd be returned safe and sound, and they are. But I'm not leaving. If you do not, you will be destroyed, Dron informed him. They're launching attack ships, Odo called out. I count 10 of them. Red alert, Sisko said calmly. Raise shields. Weapons to full strength. Dron, Torq called. This is insanity. There is no reason to attack this vessel. It means you no harm. Idiot, muttered Dron. He moved to cut off the communication.
Wait! Cried Torq frantically. You must restore the original program and complete the real great design. Never, said Dron with finality, and the screen reverted to stars. Well, said Kira brightly, that could have gone better. Sisko turned to face Torq and Sana. Now what will you do? He asked gently. Dron knew the truth all along, and has no intention of allowing it. Torq thought for a moment. Sana rubbed his shell supportively. I will follow where you lead, she said simply. Torq nodded. Captain, this transporter of yours, could you use it to put us aboard the Hive? Not with our shields up, Sisko answered, and not through the Hive's shields either. We need to get inside them. I understand. We can't drop our shields while we're being attacked, Kira pointed out. We'd be sitting ducks if we did. Do not worry, Torq informed her. There is an option. He crossed to her panel and studied the screens. The 10 attack ships will close in shortly. We must deactivate them. Right, agreed Kira sarcastically. And how do we do that? I am a Hive Master, Torq informed her simply. I have all security clearances. He started to tap commands into the communication panel. We shall simply transmit a signal that will shut down their weapons and propulsion. A wide grin split Kira's face. You're my kind of guy, Torq, she enthused. Go to it. Sana turned to Sisko. If we can get aboard the Hive, she said, the propulsion unit is controlled from a command deck near the council quarters. Would it be possible to transport into that? I'd need coordinates, Sisko replied. Chief, do you have the ones for the council chambers? Aye, Captain. O'Brien smiled. And if Sana knows how far away the control deck is, I can juggle the figures a bit and try to get them closer. Excellent. Sisko nodded to Sana, who scuttled over to O'Brien's station. The main screen showed the remaining Hive, growing as they approached it. Sisko couldn't see the 10 interceptors, but the sensors were tracking them. He hoped that Torq could get the commands ready before it was necessary to fire on the enemy. It was getting harder and harder to think of the Hive dwellers as the enemy now. It was clear that only the Hive Masters had really been in control of what had happened at Durain. The bulk of the population of the Hive was oblivious to what had been done. Closing, Dax murmured. I'm reading the attack ships, Odo growled. They're powering up their weapons. Sisko glanced across to Kira and Torq. They were both crouched over her panel with intense expressions on their faces. They glanced at one another, and then Kira slapped her hand down on the controls. The vessels are losing power, Odo reported. Their weapons systems are also standing down. Good work, Sisko said. That was one less problem to worry about. Incoming call from the Hive, Kira reported. You want to acknowledge it or ignore it, Captain? Put it on the main screen, Sisko decided. Perhaps Dron wants to talk. The Grandmaster's face filled the screen again. You have betrayed the Hive, he screamed, focusing on Torq. No, Torq answered calmly. You have. Restore the original programming now. No, Dron hissed. You do not understand what it will mean. Whatever you do, you cannot succeed. We can and we will, insisted Torq. You must cease this futile struggle now. The screen went dead. I think we can take that as a no, observed Odo. What did he mean? Asked Sana, worried. He said that we do not know what we are doing. He's bluffing, guessed Kira. He's just trying to get you to stop. Perhaps, agreed Torq. In any event, it does not matter. We shall go through with our plan. It is the only way to save my people from the lies, and to save Bajor from destruction. We have no other options. We must trust that the first Hive knew better than Dron thinks they did. Approaching the Hive, Dax called. Their shields are up. I'm reading an energy buildup, Odo added. It looks as if there's some weaponry being trained at us.
Laser defenses, Torq answered briefly. My next command will override both them and the airlock controls. Once we are inside the hive, the transporter should function. He tapped in a command. They're bound to be trying to change the codes, Sisko observed. Let's hope they can't do it quickly enough to stop us. Shields dropping, Dax confirmed. On the screen, they could see a gap appearing as the airlock Torq had targeted began to open. Taking us in. She flipped the Defiant through a roll and into the capacious airlock. Thrusters brought them to a momentary rest, hovering, as the outer door closed and the inner one cycled open. As soon as she had the room, Dax boosted the Defiant through the gap and into the hive proper. This was the first sight of the interior of the hive for most of the crew. There were several gasps of surprise and delight, and an admiring, lovely technology from O'Brien. Dax concentrated on piloting the Defiant down the main axis of the hive. Thankfully, most of the smaller air traffic had been cleared. The away team had better get down to the transporter room, Sisko said. Torq, you, Sana, Dax, Odo, and Kira. O'Brien, scan the target zone again. We don't want them materializing inside a wall. He took over the pilot's seat as Dax relinquished it. I've always wanted to fly this thing, he told her with a grin. Don't damage it, Benjamin, Dax answered, winking. It's our only ride home. I'll be careful. As the away team left the bridge on a run, Sisko concentrated on taking them as close to the transport zone as he could. O'Brien cursed and glanced up from his panel. Captain, I'm reading energy discharges close to the target zone. It looks like there's some kind of a fight going on down there. Well, that might explain why the hive is stalled in space, Sisko replied. You'd better put the away team down outside the region and warn them to have their phasers ready. We may have come in on the start of a civil war. As soon as she materialized, Kira had her phaser in hand, scanning the corridor in which she found herself with the rest of the team. Odo was beside her, his own weapon at the alert. Dax scanned with her tricorder. 7 hive dwellers ahead, she announced. They seem to be assaulting the control deck. We should join them, Torq said eagerly. Perhaps they are trying to stop Dron themselves. Maybe, growled Odo. Maybe not. Let us go first. You and Sana follow behind. We're more used to this sort of thing than you are. He led the way down the corridor as Kira kept up with him. They emerged into a plaza that fronted on the control deck. Shutters were over the windows, and the 7 aliens Dax had detected were staying behind barricades, firing at the shuttered area. An assault, muttered Odo. But which side? Torq glanced over his shoulder. That's Master Raldar, he exclaimed, and 6 of his men. They're definitely on Dron's side. Then we take them out, Kira announced. Whoever they're after must be on our side. She stood up and fired 2 sharp blasts from her phaser. Odo and Dax joined in. The 6 security men collapsed without even knowing what had hit them. Did you kill them? Asked Sana anxiously. Stunned, Kira replied tersely. Raldar himself had escaped the first barrage, and alerted by the phaser sound, dropped into cover. Damn. She fired again, but succeeded in only hitting the barrier Raldar was behind. We'll not get past him easily, Dax commented. He's in a good position, and he probably called for backup. But he's not prepared for me, Odo commented. He tossed his phaser to Kira. I'll be back. Then he melted into a puddle. Sana gasped and jumped back. What? He's a shapeshifter, Kira explained. Let's hope that Raldar has the same reaction. She grinned and watched from cover as Odo flowed across the metal floor toward the barricade. Raldar popped up briefly to fire his gun at them. It created some form of electrical discharge that singed the wall beside Kira. She ducked back, then fired again as Raldar vanished. Peering out, she saw that the Odo puddle had vanished. Then, rising behind the barrier, she saw Odo reform. There was a squeal from Raldar, and then silence. All clear, called Odo. He won't be bothering us for a while.
Kira led the charge toward the barrier as Odo pulled Raldar out of the way. "Now what?" she asked, flopping down beside him. "We'd better contact whoever is inside," Dax suggested, as she, Torq, and Sana reached them. "We have to get in there, and I don't really want to go in phasers blazing. We might damage the computers." Kira nodded and then called, "Hey in there! This is Major Kira. We're here to help. We have Torq and Sana with us." After a moment, a voice called out, "Prove it." Standing, Torq replied, "I am here. We are safe and with friends. We must gain entry to the control deck." There was another brief pause, and then the main door cracked open. "Come on," the voice called out. "Quickly. Security reinforcements are on their way." Torq led the sprint for the half-open door. As soon as the small party was inside, the door was closed and barred, and equipment was pushed back against it. Kira was astonished to see that the person who had let them in also wore the security badge affixed to his shell. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Over here," called a slightly cracking female voice from the computer banks. Sana gave a delighted laugh. "Bree, what are you doing here?" "Leading a revolt," Bree answered gleefully. "Dron is furious, of course, but the truth is getting out about the murders on Durain. It is causing tremendous unrest." "If you think that caused trouble," Kira told her, "wait till you hear what else Torq and Sana have discovered." While Sana and Torq filled their colleagues in on their discovery, Kira contacted the Defiant. "We're in the control room," she reported. "It's being held by friends of Sana's, so it looks good for now. How are things up there?" "Fine," came back Sisko's reply. "They're taking a few half-hearted pot shots at us, but it's nothing we can't handle." Kira returned her attention to Torq, who had finished his explanations. "Posir left this data for us," he explained. "It will set in motion the real Great Design. It does not call for the destruction of any inhabited worlds, but we do not know what it will do instead." "Then why are we standing around talking?" demanded Bree. "Feed it to the computers, and let's see what happens." She led the way to the main navigational panel. "Tirhi, start up the engines again," she ordered. "We must head for the closest desolate world." As Torq started to download the information from his comp, the communicator chimed on the panel. Dimas checked the call and looked up, frowning. "It is Dron," he reported. "Accept," said Torq, passing the comp to Sana. "Continue," he told her. "I must try again to convince Dron." She nodded and went on with the data transfer. Torq stood before the screen. "What do you want?" he asked. Kira saw that there was shrubbery behind Dron's face this time. He was out of his office and moving. It wasn't hard to guess where he was heading. She nodded to Odo. "Another assault on the way." "Then we'd better be ready," he answered. He glanced at Dimas. "Trouble." "I expected it," Dimas admitted, hoisting his tingler. "We had better stand by the doors again." Kira listened to the conversation as she sought out a good spot to defend. She settled beside one of the shuttered windows, phasering a small hole to see and shoot at her. "You must give up this insanity," Dron demanded. "You have no idea what you are doing." "I am completing the Great Design," Torq informed him placidly. "Whatever happens now is what should happen." Dron cursed. "Did it not occur to you to ask yourself why we changed the Great Design?" he questioned. "The original one was unworkable. It had to be modified." "The first Hive built the Hive," Torq stated. "They knew what they were doing. I am willing to trust their judgment." "Do not be such a fool," pleaded Dron. "Their plan was to abandon the Hive and return to living on a planet. You know that this is unworkable. Our people cannot live in open spaces. You yourself are proof of this." Torq shook his head. "I am proof that we can survive it if we must. If the Great Design is that we return to life on a planet, then so be it. We shall adapt if we are worthy of survival." There was a gasp from one of the security guards in the room, but Torq ignored it. You are insane, Dron exclaimed. The aliens have warped your mind. No, said Torq coldly. You wished to warp my mind. You and those like you lied to us systematically for generations. You tried to split Sana and me. You had Harl framed for sabotage and murder. You have suppressed the great design, and even now you are willing to lie and murder to achieve your goals. You do not care about the welfare of the Hive. All that concerns you is your own power, and that is now finished. Not yet it isn't, snarled Dron. Surrender and stop your foolish plan now, or else suffer the consequences. We have nothing more to say to one another. Torq broke the contact. Then he glanced nervously at Kira. I suspect he still has some plan in his twisted mind. You're right, Odo interrupted. He gestured out at the plaza. Take a look at this. Torq ran to join Kira, and they both peered out at the empty, barricade-strewn area. From one of the side streets there came a grinding sound, and then the snout of a large machine. Running on large tires, it simply moved along, crushing whatever was in its path. The device was about 20 feet long and 8 high. It had a large blade at the front with a small nozzle protruding. A repair drone, Torq said, worried. Used for demolition work. And I have a nasty suspicion that it's aiming to demolish us, Odo muttered. There was a loud crack, and the muzzles spat flame in their direction. The 3 of them and the security guards threw themselves to the floor, just as the whole wall fell on them in the blast of a heavy explosion. Chapter 29. Kira yelped as portions of the shattered wall fell across her. Dust and smoke filled her lungs. Coughing and spluttering, she fought her way out of the debris, wiping at her tearing eyes and cursing every ache. She'd been very fortunate. The bloody mist that had been one of the security guards showed her that not everyone had been so lucky. Gasping for breath, Torq surfaced among the wreckage beside her. Seeing he was alive, Kira glanced back at the control room. The shockwave from the blast had sent the others reeling further back, but they appeared unharmed for the most part. One of the technicians seemed to have a broken arm, and Bree had a large cut across her forehead. She was ignoring it and struggling back toward the navigation computer. Odo formed from nowhere beside Kira. We were fortunate, he told her. The shutters absorbed some of that blast. Glancing at her phaser, still clutched spasmodically in her hand, Kira grimaced. Might as well throw stones at that armored drone. She slapped her communicator. Kira to Sisko. We need help, now! Sisko banked the Defiant, heading back toward the control deck. Laser fire splashed harmlessly against the shields. The Hive didn't dare deploy too much firepower inside itself for fear of structural damage. We're on our way, he informed Kira. Powering up phasers, O'Brien reported from the weapons console. According to the sensors, someone's opened fire on the control deck. They must be stark raving mad. If they damage the instruments there, who knows what will happen. I don't think Dron is thinking too clearly right now, Sisko informed him. He's losing his grip on power, and is just trying to stop Torq at all costs. We don't dare take any chances on that drone opening fire again. Take it out on the first shot, Chief, and don't worry about casualties. Aye, Captain. O'Brien bent to the task. Coming in range. Now! Kira saw the Defiant hurtle into view, narrowly missing a collision with one of the towers. As it banked, the phasers lit up, and she looked away. Twin beams glanced from the sky and onto the drone. For a second, she saw it silhouetted in a blinding light. And then it and 3 Hive dwellers who were tumbling from it vanished into nothingness. She staggered to her feet, surveying the wreckage in the plaza through the gaping hole that had been the front wall of the control deck. It certainly looked as though a war had been fought here. Dron is dead, said Torq with some satisfaction. He was one of those killed in the blast that saved us. Raldar was another. I did not recognize the third. Couldn't have happened to a nicer fellow, Kira muttered. She turned her attention back to Sana, Bree, and the others. How's it going there? The transfer of data is complete, Sana replied. The program has been activated and is running. As soon as we reach Terrain 3, the program should begin. Bree looked nervous. Are you sure that this is a good idea? She asked. I know it is the will of the first Hive, but if Dron was telling the truth, then we are committing our race to life on a planet again. They will not be prepared for this. Perhaps we should wait? The urgency is past, after all. No, Torq answered firmly. If we wait, the remaining Hive Masters may begin a new assault. And if we ask the Hive whether to proceed with the real great design, I suspect that there will be a great deal of discussion. Many may favor returning to Dron's plan. We must act, and act now, however severe the consequences. Torq laid a gentle hand on Kira's arm. Now might be a good moment for you all to leave, he suggested. This is our destiny. We must face it alone. Understood. Kira holstered her phaser. Good luck. She tapped her communicator as Odo and Dax joined her. You're a sight, Kira informed her smoke-smudged friend. Speak for yourself, Dax said with dignity. Unless you're planning on making blood your new uniform color. Realizing she had been injured in the blast, Kira grimaced. Another new uniform requisition, she sighed. I hate filling out those forms. She tapped her communicator. Kira to Sisko. 3 to beam up. I think it's time we left. Dax held the Defiant in synchronous orbit several planetary diameters out from the rocky surface of Terrain 3. She smiled back at Sisko. Ringside seat, she announced. Sisko smiled back. Thanks, old man. He glanced around the bridge. Kira had just returned, a bandage across her left shoulder and a patch on her forehead. How do you feel? Lousy, Kira replied, grinning. But I'm not going to miss this. Anything happen yet? No. Sisko turned his attention back to the main screen. The Hive was slowly crawling toward the waiting planet. The wings were bent again in the position that they had been when it had drained Terrain 4. The huge mechanical construction hovered in space above the globe, now cradled in the space between the wings. Nobody spoke. Sisko saw that O'Brien was feverishly activating every spare sensor and camera to record whatever was about to happen. Then it began. The strange blue fire began to play across the lower surface of the Hive, like lightning zipping back and forth. It started slowly, building in intensity, the light moving from blue into blinding white. It seethed and rolled in the gap, and then the first lance of fire leaped down to touch the surface of the planet. The first bolt was followed by several more, and then a barrage of fire rained from the Hive onto the dead surface of Terrain 3. In moments, the entire planet was glowing with the blue-white incandescence. Is something going wrong? Asked Odo. I don't know, Sisko admitted. Just watch. The globe was starting to writhe beneath the falling blasts of energy. It seemed to be seething in preparation to explode, just as it seemed to Sisko that the tortured world could endure no more. The light changed. A golden glow seeped down the blasts, crawling across the battered surface. The world was glowing still, but the light changed, shading into a deeper gold, and then umber. The Hive shifted. A ripple spread across the gigantic wings, as if it were a cloaking device about to fade the vessel into invisibility. The stability returned briefly, and then the Hive started to fade slowly, becoming slightly transparent. My God, muttered O'Brien. It's an inversion field. But the power of it. His voice faded into a whisper of awe. The Hive itself was fading. The glow about the planet increased, getting slowly brighter as a vast transfer of energy took place. The hive was looking less and less real, the fires burning brighter and more gloriously. Then came a blinding explosion of light, and the hive was gone. Only the interplay of color from the glow remained. It whirled about the planet like a cloud of luminescence, touching everything. Fingers of splendid aura stroked the world, caressing it. As the glow started to die down, Sisko could make out blurred images on the once barren surface. There was water, he was sure of that. Vast oceans, smaller rivers, barely visible from space. The gray, dust-colored rocks that had once been the surface of Terrain 3 were gone. In their place, he could make out greenery. "Close up," he ordered. "As close as you can manage." Dax complied, and the screen shimmered and then refocused. They were looking down on vast expanses of trees, forests and jungles, growing on the once dead world. Clouds were starting to form above them. "O'Brien," he called, not tearing his eyes from the screen for a second. "What do you read down there?" "What don't I read?" exclaimed the chief, stunned and happy. "There's a viable atmosphere, plants, animals, and I'm getting the readings for several cities, all clustered on the southern continent," he added. "Millions of life signs. I'd say that the hive dwellers made it safely." Torq gasped as he straightened up. It had felt so strange to be in the grip of the forces that they had unleashed. For several moments he was terrified that the powers he had set free would destroy them all, but a vast peace had settled upon him as the hive had started to break apart. Now he stood on the surface of their new world. Before him lay the city he knew so well from the hive, transferred somehow intact to the surface of their new planet. Around him, other people were forming. He saw Sana and rushed to her in delight. Then Bree and Dimas and the rest of the hive dwellers appeared on the surface of a planet. 1,000,000 hive dwellers looked up and saw the open sky above their heads for the first time in their lives. They screamed and whirled into catatonic balls of shell, retreating from the reality they couldn't face. Torq stared around at his traumatized fellows, sadness in his heart. "It is hard for them," he said. "They will learn to adapt," Sana assured him. "It is possible. You have proven that." "Yes," he agreed. "Yes, I have." Kira snorted good-naturedly. "It looks like it's all turned out okay after all," she commented. Dax nodded. "They're certainly in for an adventure. I wonder how they'll do." "If they're all anything like Torq and Sana," Sisko commented, "I wouldn't be too worried about them. Mind you, they're going to need a lot of help and advice, I suspect. Living on a planet is very different from living in space." Kira gave a crooked grin. "Maybe there are a few thousand refugees from Terrain 4 who would appreciate a new home," she suggested. "If they can forgive the innocent hive dwellers, maybe they could teach each other a few things." Sisko smiled. "That sounds good to me. Do you think you could make it sound good to Shakaar?" "You can bet on it," Kira replied. "In fact, Quark could bet on it." She snapped her good fingers. "Hadn't we better call Shakaar and tell him that Bajor's out of danger?" "Yes," Sisko agreed. "I imagine he'll be most interested. And he's probably dying to tell Jarrow just where to go about now." He gave the screen one last look. The new world looked beautiful as it started to cloud over. "They've got a fascinating adventure ahead of them," he said softly. "I almost envy them." Dax smiled at him. "Only almost?" she teased. "Yes." Sisko nodded at the screen. "I'll bet there's plenty of space for baseball diamonds down there, old man. Now, set course for Deep Space Nine. We've got a lot of work to catch up on." As Dax started to follow his orders, Sisko sat back in his chair. It had been a close call, but once again he had somehow come through. Maybe he was better than he'd once believed. Maybe he was simply luckier than he'd once believed. Or just maybe, Yarka was right. It was the will of the prophets. End of Objective Bajor by John Peel. Read by James D. Lotell in the studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, Louisville, Kentucky, for the Library of Congress, February 1999. Published by Pocket Books, a division of Simon & Schuster, Incorporated, 1230 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10020.